Eastern Montana. Late October, 1931. A girl stands alone on the edge of a wind-scraped plateau, 16 years old, with a canvas sack and $100 folded into her coat pocket. Behind her, the only home she's ever known grows smaller in the dust. Ahead, nothing but grassland, wind, and the promise of the coldest winter in a decade. Her name is Ruth Callan, and in 6 weeks, she'll be living underground. Not in shame, not in failure, in the warmest shelter for 50 miles. But right now, nobody knows that. Right now, she's just the girl they threw out. The one walking toward the old Hendricks property where rusted military scrap sits half-buried in the sage. A forgotten Quonset hut from the Great War, bent and abandoned like a broken rib cage. She doesn't have a plan. She has dirt, wind, cold, and a ticking clock. What she's about to build will look insane. Neighbors will call it a death trap. A respected carpenter will tell her she's digging her own grave. But when the temperature drops to 30 below and the wind turns vicious, when wood stoves devour cords of timber and still can't keep children warm, Ruth Callan's hole in the ground will stay 47 degrees warmer than the finest log cabin in the county. This is the story of how desperation became engineering. How a teenage girl with no training understood something about heat, earth, and survival that men with decades of building experience had missed. If you want to see one frontier hack every week that actually worked when lives depended on it, hit that subscribe button right now. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what Ruth figured out in 1931 still works today. Let's go back to the moment it all started. Ruth Callan wasn't supposed to be out here. She was supposed to be inside, keeping house, learning to cook, waiting for some farmer's son to marry her and take her off her stepfather's hands. That was the plan. That was how it worked in Miles City, Montana, in 1931, especially when you were a girl with no mother and a stepfather who saw you as one more mouth he couldn't afford. So when she turned 16 in September and he told her she had until the end of the month to find work or find the door, she believed him. She found work, cleaning floors at the train depot, $7 a week. He took 6. By late October, when she asked to keep $2 to buy a winter coat, he told her to get out. No coat, no warning, just out. She left with a wool blanket, a biscuit tin with some dried meat, and the $100 her mother had sewn into the lining of an old coat before she died. Ruth had never touched it. She was saving it for something important. Turned out, survival was important. She walked east, out of town, into the open country where land was cheap and nobody asked questions. She knew the Hendricks place. Everyone did. Old man Hendricks had died 2 years back, and his property sat unclaimed. A few acres of hard ground, some rotted fence posts, and the remnants of a military surplus sale for 1919. Hendricks had bought a Quonset hut, one of those half-cylinder metal shelters the Army used for equipment storage during the war. He'd never assembled it, just left the curved panels lying in the dirt like the bones of some iron animal. Ruth stood in front of it on the first day of November. The wind hit her so hard she had to lean into it. She had no lumber, no nails, no tools except a small folding shovel she'd taken from the depot. She had dirt. She had wind. She had cold pressing down from the north like a hand on her chest. And she had a structure nobody wanted, made of ribbed steel, designed to shelter trucks and supplies, but never people. The idea came slow, not like a flash of brilliance, more like the only move left on the board. If she couldn't build up, if she couldn't afford walls or a wood frame or a foundation, then maybe she could build down. She'd seen root cellars. She'd seen dugouts used by homesteaders in the 1880s, back when the plains were even more unforgiving. Dirt doesn't burn. Dirt doesn't freeze. Dirt holds heat the way stone does, slow and steady. And if she could bury half the structure, use the earth as insulation, and cover it with that curved steel roof, it wasn't a house. It wasn't even a cabin, but might keep her alive. She started digging. The first thing Ruth did was pace out the Quonset hut, 20 feet long, 12 feet wide at the base. The ribs were solid, corrugated steel, designed to flex under weight but not collapse. Some of the panels were rusted through, but most were intact. She could use them. She decided to go down 4 feet. Not because she'd done the math. Not because she understood thermal mass or convection or any of the physics that would later explain why her shelter worked. She went down 4 feet because that's how deep the ground stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. She dug potatoes. She'd helped with root cellars. She knew that below the frost line, the earth stayed stable. She used the folding shovel and a flatboard she found in the ruins of Hendrik's old wagon. The ground was hard, packed clay and stone, but not frozen yet. She worked in sections, carving out a rectangular pit, piling the dirt along the edges. It took her 9 days. 9 days of digging, breaking rocks, hauling dirt. Her hands bled. Her back locked up. She slept in the blanket, ate the dried meat, drank from a creek a quarter-mile south. Nobody stopped by. Nobody checked on her. By the 10th day, she had a pit, 4 feet deep, 20 feet long, 12 feet wide. Now came the strange part. She dragged the Quonset panels over, one by one. Each panel was heavy, maybe 80 pounds, but she used leverage, a plank, and sheer stubbornness. She didn't bolt them together the way the Army manual probably said. She overlapped them, lashed them with baling wire she scavenged from the fence line, and set the whole curved structure across the top of the pit like a lid. The ribs of the Quonset rested on the dirt walls she'd left at ground level. She packed earth up against the sides, tight, thick, sloped to shed water. She left one end open for a door and covered it with a wooden frame and canvas tarp she'd bought in town for $3. Inside, the floor was dirt. The walls were dirt. The ceiling was ribbed metal, curved like the inside of a barrel. It looked like a burrow, like something an animal would make. She carved steps down into the entrance, cut a trench for drainage, and dug a small fire pit in the center with a chimney hole punched through the top of the Quonset using a railroad spike and a rock. For heat, she built a small firebox out of stacked stones she pulled from the creek bed. No mortar, no cement, just stones fitted tight, with a flat capstone for a cooking surface. The whole thing, labor, materials, scrap wire, canvas, a few stones, cost her $47. She had $53 left. She bought a bag of beans, some flour, a tin pot, and a box of matches. Then she sat inside her Dugout Quonset in the near dark, with the wind screaming outside and the earth silent around her. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a grave with a door. But it was hers, and winter was coming. Ruth didn't go back to Miles City for 2 weeks. When she finally did, on foot, to buy supplies, the question started. Where you staying, girl? Out east. Hendrik's place. In what? Ain't nothing out there but dirt and scrap. She didn't answer. She bought her flour, her beans, her kerosene for a small lamp, and left. But word got around. Someone rode out to sea. Came back laughing. She's living in a hole, he said at the hardware store, loud enough for everyone to hear. Dug herself into the ground like a damn prairie dog. Got that old Quonset hut sitting on top like a lid on a coffin. People laughed. Not cruel exactly. More like disbelief. She'll flood out first rain. She'll freeze. Metal don't hold heat. Everyone knows that. She'll suffocate. No airflow. A few people felt bad for her. A few thought she'd come crawling back by Thanksgiving. Most just forgot about her. But then Frank Claymore heard about it. Frank Claymore was the best carpenter in eastern Montana. Built half the barns in Custer County. His houses were tight, square, and proud. He didn't improvise. He didn't guess. He built the way his father taught him, and his father before that. When he heard what Ruth had done, he rode out to see for himself. He stood at the edge of her pit, looked down at the stairs carved into the earth, at the curve of the Quonset, at the packed dirt walls. Ruth was inside, cooking beans on her stone stove. You planning to winter in that? Claymore called down. She looked up, nodded. He shook his head. That ain't a house, girl. That's a grave with a roof. First hard freeze. That metal's gonna pull every degree of heat right out of you. You'll wake up with frost on your face. And when the snow melts, you'll drown in mud. He wasn't being mean. He was being honest. You got family? He asked. No, sir. Then you better find work in town. Because that thing you built, it'll kill you before Christmas. He rode off. Ruth went back to her beans. She didn't have a counter-argument. She didn't have science or calculations. She just had the fact that the air inside her dugout stayed still and cool, even when the wind outside was trying to rip the sage out by the roots. She had the fact that the earth around her didn't move, didn't creak, didn't let the cold in through 1,000 invisible cracks the way it did. She didn't know if Claymore was right. She just knew she didn't have another option. So she stayed. The cold came early that year. By mid-November, the temperature had already dropped below zero 3 times. By early December, it wasn't coming back up. December 17th, 1931. A cold front swept down from Canada like a wall of iron. The temperature in Miles City hit 15 below, then 20, then 30. The wind didn't stop. It screamed across the plains at 40 miles an hour, ripping heat out of every surface it touched. Inside the wood-frame houses in town, people burned through their winter wooden days. Stoves roared. Families huddled. Children slept in coats. Out at the Hendricks place, Ruth Callan woke up on the morning of December 18th in total darkness. She lit her lamp. The air inside the dugout was still. Cold, yes, but still. No wind. No draft. The dirt walls absorbed the lamplight and held it like they were breathing. She fed her fire. 3 small pieces of wood. Not logs. She didn't have logs. Just scraps, branches, anything she could gather from the creek bed. The fire caught. Smoke rose through the chimney hole and vanished into the frozen sky above. She boiled water, made cornmeal mush, ate it slow. Outside, the wind tried to kill everything it could reach. Inside, the temperature held. She didn't know it yet, but while she sat there eating breakfast in her buried steel room, the Mitchell's cabin 3 miles west had dropped to 2 degrees inside. The Langley's house had ice on the interior walls. The fire at the Fremont homestead went out in the night, and they woke to find their water bucket frozen solid. Ruth's fire burned for 6 hours on those 3 pieces of wood. When it died down, the temperature inside her dugout dropped, but only to 42 degrees. 42, while the air outside was 30 below zero. She didn't have a thermometer. She didn't know the number. She just knew she wasn't shivering. She knew the dirt around her felt warmer than the air. She knew she could touch the metal ceiling, and it wasn't burning cold the way Claymore said it would be. The storm lasted 4 days. Ruth used less than half a quart of wood. Her neighbors, in their proper houses with their proper stoves, burned through 2 cords each and still froze. On December 22nd, when the wind finally stopped, a rider came out to check on her. He expected to find a body. He found Ruth Callan sitting on her steps in the sun, patching her coat. "You alive?" he said, half joking, half serious. "Yeah," she said. "Ow!" She looked at him, looked back at the curved steel roof, the dirt packed around it, the thin line of smoke rising from her chimney. "Stayed warm," she said. He rode back to town, and he told everyone, "Stay with me," because what happened next silenced every single critic. It started with Frank Claymore. He didn't believe it. A 16-year-old girl, living in a hole in the ground, surviving the coldest stretch of winter anyone could remember, on scraps of firewood and a pile of dirt? Impossible. So he wrote out himself, brought a thermometer. It was December 28th, 1931. The air temperature outside was 12 below zero. Wind chill made it feel like 30 below. Claymore climbed down into Ruth's dugout. The air hit him like stepping into a different season. He hung the thermometer on a nail Ruth had driven into one of the Quonset ribs. 48 degrees Fahrenheit. He stared at it, shook it, checked it again. 48. 60 degrees warmer than outside. He looked at Ruth. She was sewing a patch onto a burlap sack, calm as Sunday. "How much would you burning?" he asked. "Maybe 4, 5 pieces a day," she said. "Sometimes less." Claymore did the math in his head. A standard wood stove in a frame house that size would need 12 to 15 pieces a day, minimum, just to keep the temperature above freezing. And even then, you'd wake up cold. Ruth was using a third of that, and staying warm. He walked the perimeter, ran his hand along the dirt walls. Cold to the touch, but not frozen. The earth was holding temperature. Slowly, steadily. He looked up at the curved metal ceiling. Expected it to be slick with condensation, frozen, useless. It was dry. The heat from her small fire rose, hit the curve of the steel, and radiated back down. The shape of the Quonset, designed by engineers to be structurally efficient, turned out to be thermally efficient too. No corners for heat to get trapped and wasted. Just a smooth curve that sent warmth back where it came from. And the earth, for feet of it, packed tight on 3 sides. Dirt doesn't conduct heat fast. It holds it, stores it, releases it slow. During the day, her fire warmed the air. The air warmed the dirt. The dirt stayed warm for hours after the fire died. At night, when the temperature outside plunged, the dirt gave that heat back. Not all of it, not fast, but enough. Enough to keep the space livable. Enough to keep her alive. Claymore sat down on the dirt floor. "I'll be damned," he said. Ruth looked up. "You staying for coffee?" He stayed. And when he left, he didn't ride back to town talking about the crazy girl in the hole. He rode back talking about thermal mass, about earth-sheltered construction, about how the old-timers who built dugouts in the 1880s weren't stupid. They were smart. They just didn't have the language for it. By January, 3 more people had visited Ruth's dugout with thermometers. Same result. Every time. Outside, 0 to 30 below. Inside, 42 to 50 degrees. Wood consumption, 1/3 of a conventional cabin. Fire maintenance, twice a day instead of every 2 hours. No frozen water. No ice on the walls. No children crying from the cold. The girl they'd laughed at, the one Frank Claymore said was digging her own grave, had built the most efficient shelter in Custer County. With $100, a pile of dirt, and a piece of scrap metal nobody wanted. 47 degrees warmer. 1/3 of the wood. And she survived on recycled junk. The numbers didn't lie. And the ones who doubted her couldn't argue with a thermometer. Spring came late in 1932. When the snow finally melted and the ground thawed, Ruth Callan emerged from her dugout, Quonset the same way she'd gone in, alone, quiet, and alive. She'd survived the worst winter eastern Montana had seen in 15 years. She'd done it on scrap metal, dirt, and less firewood than it took most families to get through a single week. And people noticed. The first visitor came in early March. A homesteader named Carl Everhart from 10 miles south. He'd heard the stories all winter, but didn't believe them. Now he stood at the edge of Ruth's pit, looking down at the curved steel roof, the packed earth walls, the stone chimney, still breathing a thin line of smoke into the cool spring air. "Mind if I come down?" he asked. Ruth waved him in. Everhart walked the space slowly, ran his hand along the dirt walls, looked up at the Quonset ribs, crouched by the fire pit, and studied the stones. "You really stay warm in here?" he asked. "Warmer than most," Ruth said. "How much wood?" 4, 5 pieces a day. Sometimes 3 if I let it run low at night. Everhart straightened. He'd burned 6 cords that winter. 6 cords, and his kids still slept in coats. "What did this cost you to build?" $50, maybe. The Quonset was free. Rest was dirt and time. He nodded. Didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "You mind if I try something like this?" Ruth shrugged. "Dirt's free." Everhart built his version that summer. Not a Quonset. He didn't have one. But he dug a root cellar twice as deep as normal, framed a low roof over it, and packed earth on 3 sides. Used it as a winter workshop. Burned 1/3 of the wood he used to. Stayed comfortable enough to work with his hands. Word spread. By autumn, 2 more families had dug partial dugouts. Not homes. Most people couldn't stomach the idea of living underground. But storage sheds, workshops, shelters for livestock. Anything that needed to stay warm without burning through a fortune in firewood. They called them half-burrows. Some called them Callan shelters, though Ruth never asked for the credit. Frank Claymore, the carpenter who'd told Ruth she was digging her grave, came back in October of 1932. Brought his son. "I'm building a house for the Petersons," he said. "They want the cellar dug 4 feet down, earth-bermed on the north side. Said they heard it works." He paused. "I told them I didn't believe it until I saw yours." Ruth nodded. "It works." "Yeah," Claymore said. "It does." He left her a cord of firewood. Didn't say why. Didn't need to. By 1935, at least 12 structures in the region had incorporated some version of Ruth's design. Some were full dugouts. Others were bermed on one side, or built into hillsides, or sunk a few feet below grade with earth piled around the foundation. Nobody called it new. Nobody called it genius. They called it practical. And on the frontier, practical was the highest compliment you could give. Ruth stayed in her Dugout Quonset for 4 more years. Saved money. Taught herself, to read surveyor maps. Eventually bought a small piece of land closer to town and built a real house. But even that house had a root cellar dug deep, with thick earth walls and a stone floor that stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. She never talked much about the winter of 1931. Never wrote it down. Never claimed to have invented anything. But the people who survived that winter with her, the ones who saw her walk out of that storm with a smile and a patched coat, they remembered. They remembered that a 16-year-old girl with no training, no money, and no family had outthought every experienced builder in the county. Not because she was smarter, because she was desperate enough to try what everyone else was too proud to consider. She didn't fight the earth. She didn't fight the cold. She used them, and that made all the difference. Ruth Callan's Dugout Quonset wasn't a miracle. It was physics, thermal mass, earth insulation, wind protection, radiant heat from a curved surface, slow, steady heat storage in 4 feet of dirt. The principles she stumbled onto in 1931 are the same ones engineers use today in earth-sheltered homes, geothermal design, and passive solar construction. She didn't have a language for it. She didn't need it. She had cold, dirt, and a will to survive. And that was enough. The lesson isn't that we should all go live in holes. The lesson is that the old methods, the ones we call primitive or backwards, were often just good engineering disguised as necessity. The frontiersmen and women who built dugouts, sod houses, root cellars, and earth berm cabins weren't doing it because they didn't know better. They were doing it because it worked. 47 degrees warmer. A third of the wood. Built for $50 with scrap and dirt. Ruth Callan didn't need a degree. She needed a winter. And she came out the other side warmer than everyone who doubted her. Now it's your turn. Comment below. Where are you watching from? And what's the coldest winter you've ever faced? And if you want one frontier survival hack like this every single week, real techniques that kept people alive when it mattered, hit that subscribe button right now. Because the past wasn't primitive. It was proven. Educational note. This script is for historical and educational storytelling purposes. It dramatizes real principles of earth-sheltered construction and thermal mass, but should not be taken as professional engineering or building advice. Modern earth-sheltered or semi-subterranean construction requires proper drainage, ventilation, structural engineering, and compliance with local building codes. Consult licensed professionals before attempting any similar project.